In one of the previous videos, we learned about the useState hook, which is used to add state to the functional components. We learned that useState gives us two things. First is the value that persists across vendors and a function to update the value and trigger a re-render, or in other words, a state updating function. So we do need both the things, and we do need the ability to persist the value across the vendors so as to have dynamic data in our application. Also, we do need the state updating function as well, because without it, the UI will never update. Now suppose we have a use case in which we don't need to trigger a re-render, but we need to persist the value across the re-renders. So this we can achieve using the useRef hook. So let us see an example to understand the useRef hook. So here I am back on Code Sandbox, and here is an example for refs. So here we are using a counter piece of state which has an initial value of 0. Next, inside our useEffect hook, we call our setInterval function, and after every 1000 milliseconds, we are going to call the setCounter state updating function, and we are going to update the counter value based on the previous counter value. So this increments the counter value after every 1 second. Next, we have a button to stop the counter. Now as we know, the setInterval function returns us an ID. So in order to clear the interval from counting, we need to invoke the clearIdentifier function, which takes on the identifier that we are setting up right here using the useRef hook, for which we are giving an initial value of null. And to the clearInterval function, we are passing identifier. And on the identifier, which is a ref, we have a current property. So we are passing this to our clearIdentifier function to clear the interval. And here we are returning it as a cleanup function from our useEffect hook. So when this ref example component gets removed from the DOM, React will invoke the clearIdentifier function to clear up the interval so that we don't have any memory leaks. Make sense? Also, we have a button down here. So if this button gets clicked, we call our clearIdentifier function that we have right here. So let me click on the stop counter. Okay, so the counting has stopped now. Now you could argue that why are we using a ref here? We could also have used a normal variable instead of a ref. Now the reason for this is very simple. If we had used a normal variable for our identifier, then that would not have persisted across vendors. As soon as our counter state variable changes, which changes every single second to be precise, React will re-render this ref example component, re-declaring that normal variable again. So that is why we need a way to persist the identifier across vendors, so we don't want that redeclaration of the identifier, and that is why using a normal variable does not make sense here. Instead, we want the value that the identifier had in the previous render, so to get that we use the useRef hook. So this is where the useRef hook comes into picture. So now if I click on the stop, so you can see on clicking of the stop button, the counter stops because we have cleared the interval. So this is how using the useRef hook, we were able to persist the value of identifier that we get from the setInterval function across renders. Make sense? So this is the syntax for our useRef hook. It takes on some initial value and gives us a ref. Now the useRef hook, in comparison to the useState, useRef is very similar to useState hook in the sense that it persists a value across the renders, but unlike useState, it does not trigger a re-render of the component. So the useRef takes on an initial value, which in our example is null in the start, and it spits out an object with a current property. So keep in mind that the useRef hook is equivalent to the useState hook without the state updating function. So here is our ref with the current property, which I just mentioned. Now another use case for refs is to access the DOM nodes. So let us check the ref example 2. So let me comment this and uncomment this. So let us see an example for this as well. So if we pass the value of ref to an input, as you can see here, React will set the current property to the corresponding DOM node, which is input in our case. This allows you to grab the input values or set focus as we are doing in our useEffect hook on the initial render. So if you notice here, we have two refs, email ref and the password ref. Now whenever our form gets submitted, the handle form submission function will get triggered. So let me enter something here, and here as well click on register. So here we are tapping the email and password that the user enters via the corresponding ref's current property. So here we are retrieving them and we are logging them to the console. So another way to use a ref is to set focus, which we are doing on the initial vendor. So email ref.current.focus, which gives the focus to our email field on the initial vendor. So this is it for this video. Let's catch up in the very next one.